Good evening. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. The most perilous moment in your day is not the crisis itself. It is the instant you turn to heaven or to your own heart and demand, why would God allow this? That cry is not a mere outburst. It is a crossroads. And I know the pain that drives it. I have sat in rooms where the diagnosis came like thunder. I have stood by telephones that rang with news no one wanted to hear. I have watched the bank account drop and the friendship fracture and the storm rise on a sky that had been blue an hour before. And always the mind, out of habit and out of fear, lunges not for God but for explanation. This, I tell you, is the hinge on which your day turns, for in that lunge you step backward, back under law, back under the second chapter of Genesis, back under the knowledge of good and evil. What is the meaning of that backward step? It is the will to judge the appearance, to declare this is evil, or to cling to the opposite and say this would be good if only it would come. The urge to explain is usually the concealed urge to judge. And judgment, the Master said, brings you under its own judgment. Judge not, that ye be not judged. And again, judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not finding a better reason for the storm. It is refusing the storm as a power. The moment you fasten a moral label to the picture before you and call it power, you have consented to fear, and fear obligingly takes up residence. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Sow to the belief in a second power, and you reap its fruit, confusion, strain, and the endless itch for answers that cannot heal. Do not mistake me. I am not asking you to be numb or to pretend. I am calling you to change the basis of perception. You can trust without understanding, because trust is not the opiate of the intellect. It is the recognition of the presence. Be still and know that I am God. Be still does not mean passive. It means cease judging. Know that I am God does not mean add a religious caption to a frightening scene. It means return all power to the One. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. If God is omnipresent, then God is the only presence where the pain claims to be. If God is omnipotent, then God is the only power where the cause seems to operate. If God is omniscience, then God is the only mind in which true interpretation arises. Grace begins precisely where condemnation ends. The moment you lay down the judge's robe, you are no longer under the court of fear. Ask yourself very quietly, what am I calling power? The specialist word? The ledger's red ink? A headline or a rumor or a symptom that shouts in the night? When you demand an explanation, you unknowingly enthrone the appearance as cause. You hand it the scepter and then beg it to be kind. But there is only one cause. There is only one law. There is only one presence. To step out from under law and into grace is to revoke your consent to appearances as authority and to acknowledge God as the I within you, the life of you, the law of you, the very essence of your being. I am convinced, and I speak from practice, not theory, that you do not need a single outward reason to be at peace. You need a different center. You need, when the heart races and the mind stabs for answers, to pause and refuse the first interpretation. You will learn, and we will take this up as our method, to begin at the word God and to wait until the assurance of God is on the field. But even before we come to the practice, hear this. The doorway out of fear is the end of judgment. Stand where you are, in the middle of whatever calls itself trouble, and without words, if necessary, withdraw the labels, return the scepter, and let God be God. This is really it. The instant you stop naming evil, you make room for grace, and grace is not a theory. It is the felt presence that requires no explanation. In that stillness, the question dies because the questioner has been found. And where God is, all Fear has no court in which to try you. Now let us come directly to the root, because to circle the leaves will not change the tree. The question is not, why did this happen? The living question is, what am I afraid of? And if you will answer that honestly, another question follows on its heels. What power am I granting to this circumstance? And still another. What am I calling cause? I say this with a great deal of seriousness. Fear is never free-floating. It is tethered to a judgment. And judgment is always a covert ascribing of power. The moment you find what you have called power, you have found the idol that has been enthroned in your consciousness, and then you know what to dethrone. Start with the word God. God is omnipotence, not as a religious compliment, as a law. Once hath God spoken, twice have I heard this, that power belongeth unto God. Psalm 62:11. If power belongs to God, there is no power in any effect, no power in the report, no power in the symptom, no power in the bank balance, no power in the verdict, no power in the memory that still burns your cheeks at night. There is no power in any effect, because God is all power. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45:5. If there is none else, what other cause is there to fear? What other law is there to obey? Whose scepter have you kissed? It is always some effect, ink on paper, vibration in nerves, an image in the mind that you have mistakenly elevated to a cause. Do not misunderstand me. This is not a denial of feeling. If tears come, let them wash the eyes clear. If the pulse runs, breathe and be gentle with your frame. We are not shaming humanity. We are removing authority from the appearance so that the heart may come to rest in God. Be still and know that I am God, Psalm 46:10, is not a sentence against your humanity. It is a sentence against the pretense of a second power. Be still means stop investing the image with cause. Know that I am God means return the scepter whence it came. You will discover that the ache is not fed by the event. The ache is fed by the consent you gave to the event as power. Withdraw consent, and the ache finds no more bread. What specifically have you been calling power? The specialist's inflection? The red figures at the bottom of the ledger? The tone in a loved one's last word? The echo of a courtroom gavel? The specter of always happens to me rising out of a childhood corridor? Answer it plainly. None of these is cause. They are all effects within the one infinite cause, and that cause we name God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, Deuteronomy 6:4. One, not two. Not 1.5 when the news is bad, and 1.25 when it is good. One. The belief in a second cause, that sly little "but what if," is precisely the root of your oscillation between peace and panic. And so I counsel you, as a practitioner of this way, when the picture flashes and the heart contracts, do not ask, why did this come? Ask, what am I calling power right now? Then answer, nothing in this field is power. God alone is power. Say it if you must 12 times, not to hypnotize yourself, but to release the hypnotism that has tried to fasten on you. If God be for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:38. Who indeed, if the only against was your own consent to a second cause? This is the recentering on which trust rests. Trust is not the mood of a sunny morning. It is the stance of one who has returned all power to God and therefore needs no guarantee from circumstance. As long as you loan authority to the appearance, you will try to borrow peace from its behavior. And you know as well as I, the interest rate on that loan is usury. But the instant you revoke the loan and let God be God, something quiet happens. You are no longer negotiating with shadows. You stand under grace, and your trust no longer rises and falls with weather, numbers, or noises. It rests where it belongs in the one who is cause, law, life, and the very presence of your being. Now let us take the Scripture not as ancient legend, but as diagnosis of a present habit. For Genesis is not a museum, it is a mirror. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Genesis 2:16, 17. What is the meaning? To live under the law of good and evil is to interpret life through two powers, to measure safety by favorable outcomes and danger by unfavorable ones, to grant authority to the swing of events, and then to call the swing your God. And when that becomes your diet, when you feed upon the knowledge of opposites, you do not die in body at that instant. You die to assurance. You die to grace. You come back under law. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. And you reap the harvest of your own divided seeing. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God. Genesis 3:7-8. I would ask you tenderly and directly, who told you that you were naked? The presence did not leave. The garden did not relocate. Their geography remained, but their consciousness shifted. Shame appeared. Hiding began. The moment you enthrone two powers in your interpretation, shame follows like a shadow, because you feel exposed to a force for which you must cover, explain, defend. Hiding follows because you have accepted an authority outside the presence and must scurry behind arguments, behind fig leaves of reasons, behind the demand for explanations. Fear follows, because to believe in a second power is to live at the mercy of tomorrow's report. Do you see how this wears daily clothing? This diagnosis is evil. This loss is evil. This delay is evil. And we sigh with relief on the opposite days. This promotion is good. This honeymoon is good. This green light is good. But both sides of that seesaw are the same board. And as long as you sit on it, up-down becomes your law. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. To call the blessing good because it behaves for you is the same duality in nicer shoes. The habit remains granting power to the picture, swearing allegiance to outcomes, measuring God by weather and numbers. That is still eating from the tree. That is still consenting to exile in the mind. We are not called to relabel everything good. We are called to step out of judgment altogether. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. Righteous judgment is not optimism. It is oneness. It says, I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45:5. If there is none else, there is not a good power and a bad power. There is not a healing power and a harming power. There is God, and there is the procession of effects within God. Hear this and let it sink. There is no power in any effect, because God is all power. As long as you forget this, you will keep sowing fig leaves of explanations to cover your fear, and explanations can never clothe you with peace. They only reinforce the belief that something out there holds a scepter. The serpent said, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil, Genesis 3-5. And ever since, the human mind has wanted to be its own court, to sit as judge of the picture, to pronounce sentence, to manage safety by managing appearances. But the price is written plainly. In the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Die to what? To the felt unity of the presence, to the immediate assurance that quiets the pulse, to the garden consciousness in which God is all and therefore no shadow can threaten your identity. You become Adam, hiding among your own interpretations from a presence that never moved. So come out from among them and be ye separate. 2 Corinthians 6:17. Not from people, but from the tribe of judgments. Refuse the daily fruit of good and evil thinking. Refuse the habit of measuring God by the behavior of effects. Refuse the flattery of calling today's sunshine good and tomorrow's cloud evil. Step into the consciousness of grace where one is cause, one is law, one is presence. This is really it. Cease eating the knowledge of opposites, and your exile ends not because the garden returns to you, but because you return to the garden. And in that return, trust ceases to be a posture you maintain by willpower and becomes the natural fragrance of a mind that has stopped naming evil and has let God be God. Let us listen now to the authority by which this way is taught, for we do not build a private doctrine, we follow the Master. When a man, well-intentioned and respectful, addressed Jesus as good Master, the reply came swift and unambiguous. Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is, God. Mark 10:18. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. That was not a lesson in social modesty. It was metaphysical precision. He refused to locate good in person, in personality, in outcome, in effect. He returned the title to its source. One good, one power, one presence. What is the meaning for us who are weary of oscillation? If there is one good, then good is not a lucky turn of events. Good is the nature of God. It is not something that arrives with a favorable report and departs with a contrary one. It is the ever-presence of the I am. I am the Lord, I change not. Malachi 3-6. Therefore, before the letter was opened and after the letter was read, before the balance went red and after it turned black, before the symptom whispered and after it fell silent, good remained what it always is, God. You can trust because your trust is not in flux. It is in the one who is not an effect among effects, but the life of all. Now hear the cadence that must become the very rhythm of your thought. God constitutes your being. God is the life of you, the mind of you, the law of you, the substance and activity and continuity of you. In him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17:28. If God constitutes your being, what separation is there from supply? None. For God is the substance of supply. What separation is there from guidance? None. For the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, Psalm 37-23. And the good man is not a moral rank, but a consciousness acknowledging one, good. What separation is there from safety? None. For underneath are the everlasting arms, Deuteronomy 33-27. And if God is the mind of you, where is the interpreter of events? Not in headlines and not in nerves, in God. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. Do you see why the Master would not allow good to be fastened on his robe? If you make good a trait of a person, or a turn in the road, or an answered petition, you have already introduced a second power. You have hidden the sun behind one of its rays, and will soon fear that the ray may fail. But if the sun itself is your trust, if God is your good, then rays may lengthen or shorten, clouds may pass or part, yet the light is not at the mercy of the weather. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23-1. That is not sentiment. It is law under grace. From this follows the next step in our practice. If God is present as your very being, then the work is never to persuade a distant deity to fix an external condition. The work is to perceive, to behold the one who is already the life here, the law here, the substance here, and to wait until that perception becomes assurance. Prayer is not pressure, prayer is recognition. Be still and know that I am God is the method in a sentence. Be still, cease judging effects, lay down the gavel. Know I am is here as your life. And when that knowing ripens into felt assurance, you will discover why no explanation from circumstances is needed. The explanation is the presence. Lo, I am with you always. Matthew 28:20. Trust becomes sane because its object is unchanging. One good, one power, one presence. I say this with a great deal of seriousness because until this point is clear, the rest of the work remains theory. Error is not a person you must change, not a place you must leave, not a condition you must conquer, not an event you must explain. Error is a belief, and that belief is the acceptance of two powers, the knowledge of good and evil. That is all the substance it seems to have. To be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Romans 8:6. Carnal mind is not a monster lurking in the dark. It is simply the mind that consents to duality, that feeds on the tree of opposites, that names and effect the cause and bows before it. This mortal mind is the acceptance of good and evil as law, and it produces its own courtroom, its own condemnations, its own sentences of fear. Now notice how fear gets its gasoline. The moment you argue with the picture, this must not be, you have said to the picture, you are power. The moment you condemn it, this is evil, and I hate it, you have lifted it to your private altar and offered it the incense of your attention. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. James 1:8. Double-mindedness is this: to affirm God with the lips and to enthrone the appearance with your reaction. And hear me, reaction is consent. To fight is to feed. To plead with the shadow is to certify its reality. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21 is not a strategy of pushing harder against the image. It is the refusal to grant the image any law, any cause, any place to stand in your consciousness. Therefore, the liberating negation must become a living rhythm in you. There is no law of disease. There is God, whose law is life. There is no law of lack. There is God, whose very nature is infinite form and function, substance and flow. There is no law of injustice. There is God, the only law, the only government, the only judge, the only judgment. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17 is not a promise that weapons will be kindly. It is a revelation that no weapon has law. Every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Matthew 15:13. Error is a plant without root, without seed, without law, and it survives only on the water you pour from the well of your consent. What then is the nature of our stance? We do not deny experience. We deny authority to the belief that would interpret experience through two powers. We do not slap away tears. We remove the crown from the image to which the tears have sworn fealty. We do not battle symptoms or argue with accounts. We quietly, steadily revoke the charter we granted them to legislate reality. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. Say it, hear it, let it become the climate in which you think and feel and decide, not as magic words, but as the description of what is so. When you cease feeding duality, the appearance loses its authority because it never had any apart from your consent. This clarifies the practice ahead and simplifies it, though it will require your constancy. Once error is seen as belief, there is nothing to fix out there, nothing to manipulate, nothing to coerce. There is a single interior action, a continuous refusal to grant reality to a second power, and a continuous recognition that God is law unto himself, and that law is the law of your being. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, 2 Corinthians 3:17. Liberty is not won by wrestling with effects, but by standing in the one cause until assurance rises of its own accord. And as we will take up in our method, you begin with God. God has all power, all presence, all law, and you wait, not straining, not bargaining, until the inner certitude that God is on the field replaces the impulse to fight. In that instant, you will know by feel, not by argument, that the spell of duality has been broken because you have withdrawn its only nutrition, your consent. Now we take up the method. And I say this with a great deal of seriousness, because without a method, you will be at the mercy of moods, and moods are unstable. The grace of this way is its simplicity and its universality. Every case is treated the same, whether it announces itself as sickness or grief, betrayal or unemployment, loneliness or family discord, whether it is a cold in a child or a threat in a letter or a silence at a table where love once spoke. The treatment is identical because God is identical. We are not treating a disease or a debtor or a distance. We are treating consciousness, and the practitioner, the one sitting in this chair or standing in that kitchen, is the only one who ever receives a treatment. Part one is conscious knowing. Start with the word God. Not as preface, not as ceremony. Start there because God is all. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, Deuteronomy 6-4. One presence, one power, one law, one cause. God is omnipresence. There is no place where God is not the life of the scene before you. God is omnipotence. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. God is omniscience. There is no mind to interpret this apart from the mind that is God. Declare it as law in your own awareness. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45-5. Therefore I refuse the court of good and evil. I refuse the temptation to call this picture power. I refuse to name a second cause. If fear speaks, answer it with law. Once hath God spoken, twice have I heard this, that power belongeth unto God. Psalm 62-11. This is not hypnotism, it is de-hypnotism. We are not adorning an appearance with religious language. We are withdrawing its only claim to authority, our consent. Then, part two, receptive communion. Having known, we wait. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. 1 Samuel 3-9. Or, as I often say in the silence, wait, Lord, thy servant heareth. Do not strain for a feeling. Do not try to manufacture light on the ceiling or warmth in the chest. Do not intensify your breathing as if God were a shy bird to be coaxed. Be still and know. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Isaiah 30-15. Sit in the recognition you have voiced until the recognition becomes the atmosphere, until the agitation drops its case, until there is the quiet, unargued sense that God is on the field. You will know it. It is a click, a settling, an inner yes that requires no witness, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Zechariah 4-6. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Isaiah 40-31. And the renewal is not adrenaline, it is assurance. What is happening while you wait? The treatment is taking place where it must within you. Your consciousness is yielding its last claims to a second power, and in that yielding, the law of God resumes its throne. The battle is the Lord's, 1 Samuel 17:47. When that assurance comes, you will notice changes without managing them. The shoulders soften, the breath comes without command, the compulsion to explain dissolves, the picture loses its ultimatum. You do not rush to fix or to phone or to argue the outer into better behavior. You abide. I can of mine own self do nothing. John 5:30. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. John 14:10. The outer effect follows consciousness as shadow follows substance, and under grace it does so without your engineering. Do not think you can abbreviate this because the clock is stern or the voice on the other end is loud. You cannot turn this on or off like your water tap, and you cannot substitute busyness for assurance. If it takes 30 seconds, it takes 30 seconds. If it takes 30 minutes, it takes 30 minutes. Time is not the measure. Assurance is the measure. Rise only when the strain has been replaced by the felt knowledge of God's allness right here. Then walk on without demanding explanation from circumstance, because trust has changed its address. It no longer resides in outcomes, it resides in God. And having returned all power to God in conscious knowing, and having waited until God's own assurance has become your consciousness, you are under grace. In that grace, the same method serves all cases because the same God constitutes all being. This is really it. Start with God and wait until God finishes the statement within you. Now we come to the split second that seems to decide the day. And I say this with a great deal of seriousness. It is not the outer event that breaks your peace. It is the first interpretation. The picture flashes, and the mind, trained by the tree of good and evil, labels before it breathes. This is terrible. This is evil. This means I'm abandoned. This is the end of me. That is the seed of panic. The first sound you hear is not the siren in the street. It is the gavel in your own thought pronouncing sentence on a snapshot. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. Righteous judgment begins by refusing that first label. What do you do in that instant? Stop. Become still. Refuse to name the appearance. Refuse to prophesy from a snapshot. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, Exodus 14:13. This is your salvation in shock, not speed, not argument, not dialing 3 numbers to rehearse what happened. Your salvation is to halt the reflex of judgment and return all power to God. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Be still is the instruction to your habit. Know that I am God is the returning of the scepter to its owner. If you let the first label stand, you come under law at once. You re-enter the court of cause and effect, and fear becomes your bailiff. If you refuse it, even for a breath, you remain under grace long enough for assurance to find you. Use the mantras of truth the way a drowning man uses a rope. Grip them not as magic phrases, but as law. God is here. God is the only power. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. I rest in grace. Say it plainly. Once hath God spoken. Twice have I heard this, that power belongeth unto God. Psalm 62:11. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Psalm 23:4. Let that be the atmosphere you re-enter before you touch the picture again. The mind will try to broadcast weather reports about tomorrow. This means collapse. This guarantees loss. This proves I am unprotected. Answer gently but firmly. I do not prophesy from a snapshot. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. Not want for wisdom. Not want for safety. Not want for peace in this moment. Do not misunderstand me. We are not pretending that nerves do not tremble or that tears cannot rise. The flesh may quiver, we grant it kindness, but we do not grant the picture a crown. Pain may speak, we do not let it legislate. Fear not, only believe, Mark 5:36, is not a command to turn granite. It is the invitation to shift allegiance from the verdict of appearance to the presence that cannot leave. It is I, be not afraid, Matthew 14:27. When you stop marrying the moment to a verdict, terror loses its dowry. The body may register shock, but the heart is no longer co-signer on panic because it has refused the first interpretation. So in practice, 3 movements, and they can be as swift as a single breath. First, stop. Even if your foot is on a step, pause that foot in the air and let the pause be your altar. Second, no. Start with the word God. God is here as law, as life, as the very mind by which I see this scene. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Isaiah 45:5. Therefore, nothing in this picture holds a scepter. Nothing in this report wields a law. Nothing in this sound is a cause. Third, wait. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. 1 Samuel 3-9. Wait until the strain yields to the quiet certainty that God is on the field. You will know it, the click, the settling. Rise only then to answer the phone, to sign a paper, to speak a word, to take a step. Peace, be still, Mark 4:39, becomes not a slogan to hurl at the storm, but the voice you hear in your own consciousness, and you obey it. And hear this corrective, for it will save you time and tears. Do not run to publish the picture to 5 friends under the guise of seeking prayer. Each retelling is a fresh baptism into duality. Attend first to the assurance, then speak or act from the center. The Lord is at hand, Philippians 4-5. Under that hand, you may still feel the wind, but you are no longer measuring your future by the gust. You have refused the first interpretation. You have returned to God as the only power. And because you would not demand an explanation from a snapshot, trust remains, unfastened from outcome, fastened to presence. This is really it. In the shock, your salvation is refusal. Refusal to name, refusal to prophesy, refusal to enthrone and effect an immediate return to the one who was already here before the picture knocked. Then grace, which was operating all along, can be noticed, and noticed, it governs. Let me give you a pattern, not to decorate the message with stories, but to anchor the method in the blood and breath of a day. I was driving a narrow coastal road at dusk, a curve where cliff meets sea and the shoulder is a rumor. Coming round a bend, a lorry, impatient and blinded by its own urgency, swung into my lane to pass a line of cars. There was horn, there was the sudden mathematics of speed and distance, and there was the old courtroom rushing to convene. This is evil. This is the end. This is law. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. Had I accepted that verdict, fear would have become my driver. Instead, the practice we have been taking up took me up. I stopped inside, though the wheels were still turning. I refused the first interpretation. I started with the word God. God is here as law, as sight, as the very life that is animating both vehicles. The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms, Deuteronomy 33-27. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. I waited not for the truck to behave, not for a sign from the sky, but for the click, the quieting, the inner assurance that God is on the field. It came quick as a breath and twice as deep. Then and only then did I act outwardly. I did not jerk the wheel or slam the brakes. I eased, almost as if a hand larger than mine set the movement into a small lay-by cut into the cliff so small I had never noticed it on a dozen drives. So precise it might as well have been stitched to fit that moment. The truck cleared with inches to spare. In the rear view, I saw a patrol car, unseen until then, already slowing the line he had tried to pass. Before they call, I will answer, Isaiah 65-24. I tell you, the grace at work had not been invented in my prayer. It was noticed through it. That rocky cup of safety did not spring up because I pleaded. It was there. The officer was not conjured. He was already operating in his order. What changed? My consent to panic was withdrawn. My allegiance to a second power was revoked. And then I could see the provision placed before the curve was ever taken. Another time, the appearance shouted through paper rather than headlights. A wire from the bank in a late afternoon. A promised sum had failed. A line of credit was closed. Wages due by morning. The old serpent whispered a courtroom drama in my ear. This is betrayal. This is evil. This proves you are at the mercy of men. I could have picked up the telephone and multiplied the story to a circle of sympathetic listeners, baptizing myself again in duality. Instead, I sat down in the chair where so many of my own treatments have been received, and I began where we always begin: God. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, Psalm 23:1. God is substance, God is law, God is government, God is the very structure by which true supply appears as form. There is no law of lack, there is no power in any effect, because God is all power. Then silence. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. 1 Samuel 3-9. No bargaining for reasons, no haggling for quick outcomes, waiting until assurance replaced the thrum. When the click came, it brought nothing as theatrical as a trumpet, only a remembering to open a drawer I had meant to empty a week prior. In it, an envelope, misdelivered, returned, and now readdressed to me by a neighbor, postmarked 8 days earlier, containing a check for the exact shortfall, plus enough to pay the postage due with room for gratitude. While I stood there, the telephone rang. A man I did not know, a friend of a friend who had sat in the back of a meeting months ago, said simply, I woke from sleep to send an offering. I do not know why, but I know who. Before they call, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear, Isaiah 65:24. Do you see? The mail had already moved. The neighbor had already written my name. The impulse in that man's night had already stirred. The river was running. I had only to step out of the courthouse of judgment to hear the water. What is the principle? The truck did not become good. The bank did not become kind. The pictures remained pictures, subject to the flux of traffic and commerce. What changed was the seat of authority in my own awareness. I refused to name the appearance power. I returned all power to God. I waited until the assurance of God's presence became my consciousness. And then grace, which had been operating all along, could be recognized and received. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. Genesis 28:16. When you stop judging the appearance, you begin noticing the grace that was already present. This is really it. Not a technique to force the road to widen or the bank to soften, but a relinquishment of duality so complete that the ever-present order of God is seen and trusted, it governs. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. The most persistent failure I meet after classes like these is not ignorance of the method, but the hidden habit of treating prayer as a water tap on when frightened, off when pleased, on when the letter comes or the siren sounds, off when the sun is out and the table is full. Do not make that mistake. Don't think you can turn this on or off like your water tap. You cannot live 6 days and 23 hours under the law of good and evil, judging this person, condemning that institution, forecasting doom from the morning's headlines, and then, in the moment of need, demand grace to override the very court you have been staffing with your thoughts. Ye cannot serve God and mammon, Matthew 6:24. You cannot serve the appearance with your allegiance and then expect the presence to do your bidding. Grace is not an emergency technique. It is a consciousness maintained by continuous non-judgment. What happens when you treat it like a tap? Your nervous system becomes a worshiper of appearances. It learns to spike at every clamor because you have trained it to believe that effects are causes and headlines are gods. A new report appears, and the altar is rebuilt. A rumor circulates, and there goes your worship again. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, James 1-8. Double-mindedness is not mystical. It is the simple oscillation of a thought life that blesses God in the meditation chair and enthrones appearance in the marketplace. Then when alarm strikes, you attempt a hurried treatment, but the tap seems dry. Understand me. God has not withdrawn. Your attention has wandered. The spring has not failed. The bucket you lower is full of yesterday's judgments. I have watched dear hearts, earnest, intelligent, sincere, affirm truth for 10 minutes in the morning, and then spend the remaining hours canonizing gossip, weaponizing grievances, calling this one evil and that one fool, measuring the kingdom by polls and prices, and then at dusk a phone call comes or a pain, and they pant for assurance they did not cultivate. Pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, is not a pious exaggeration. It is instruction for sanity. It does not mean uttering words all day. It means refraining from the one habit that blocks prayer, judgment, and dwelling, returning, abiding in the inner fact that God constitutes being. Abide in me, and I in you, John 15:4. Abide is the word, not visit, not sample, not tap. Abide. Let me ask you plainly, what do you do between crises? That is where your harvest is decided. If you spend the quiet hours furnishing your inner house with grievances, there will be no chair left for assurance to sit in when you most desire it. If you let your lips condemn and your mind rehearse wrongs, you are writing loyalty oaths to a second power. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, Romans 12:2. Renewing is not episodic. It is the steady refusal to assign causation to effects, the gentle, frequent return to God as the only law, the only life, the only mind. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths, Proverbs 3:6. In all thy ways includes the way you read a headline, the way you hear a neighbor, the way you walk through a shop. The cost of compartmentalized spirituality is not only missed demonstrations, it is bondage to adrenaline. It is the body teaching the soul that safety comes from manipulation. It is the mind agreeing that peace waits on weather. You cannot live that way and know grace, because grace is not managed. Grace is recognized. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty, Psalm 91:1. Dwell, abide, these are words of residence. You cannot sublet your consciousness to judgment and expect assurance to pay the rent on demand. Here, then, is the correction and the way forward, and it is mercifully simple. You cannot have office hours in this work except 24 hours a day. Let non-judgment be your continuous employment. Throughout the day, deny authority to appearances. Refuse to name a second power. Quietly, often, return with a single word, God. God constitutes my being. God is the life of this scene, the law of this encounter, the mind by which I interpret what passes before my eyes. Let the current of your thought run in that channel until it cuts a riverbed. Then, when crisis shouts, you will not need to open a tap. You will be already in the stream. Assurance will not arrive as a stranger. It will rise as your own atmosphere. This is really it. Grace is not an emergency valve. It is the air of a life that will not judge. Abide there, and when the winds rise, you will discover they cannot blow away what you do not lend them your consent to a second power. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. To abide in what we have been saying is not merely to modify a habit, it is to assume a new identity. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, 2 Corinthians 6:17. Among whom? Among the thought world that lives under the law of two powers, among the Adam mind that hides and blames and measures life by appearances. To be separate is not to be superior or aloof. It is to be of another order, the brotherhood of Christ consciousness, where there is one presence, one power, one law, and where the soul relinquishes its office as judge. Call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. Matthew 23 to 9, 10, 8. In that family, you do not sit on benches of condemnation. You dwell in the awareness that God constitutes being yours, theirs, this very moment. So there is no second cause to accuse and no second power to fear. Do not confuse this non-judgment with passivity or with the refusal to act wisely. Non-judgment is not moral indifference. It is spiritual accuracy. It is the strict refusal to assign power to conditions, to people, to histories. It is the unwavering insistence that I am the Lord and there is none else. Isaiah 45 to 5. When the picture parades before you, you do not pronounce it holy or unholy. You withdraw the scepter from it. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. Righteous judgment is the discernment that God alone is cause, life, law. From that right judgment, right action proceeds action measured, intelligent, unhurried, not because you are managing outcomes, but because you are listening where power actually is. Now let us walk this into the place where hearts bleed betrayal, abandonment, sharp words at a kitchen table, the silence that stretches between two beds. The world mind instructs you to name the offender and nail them to a verdict. Evil, danger, enemy. What happens when you do? You tether yourself to the event and to the person. You bind your peace to their next move. You drink their shadow and call it justice. Judge not, that ye be not judged. Matthew 7:1. Is not a threat from a tribunal in the sky. It is the simple fact that judgment recreates the courtroom in your own chest. But hear this, to refuse judgment is not to condone injury. It is to remove from the scene the only element that guarantees you will keep being injured, your belief in a second power. Forgive until 70 times 7, Matthew 18:22, is release, not permission. It is the surrender of your right to enthrone and effect, and when you release, you become free to hear what truly protects and guides. Perhaps a boundary to be set without hatred. Perhaps a door to be closed without spite. Perhaps a word to be spoken that is firm without poison. Whosoever sins ye remit, they are remitted unto them. John 20:23. The first remission heals you. It ends your orbit around a false power. As condemnation drops, fear loses its farm. There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus. Romans 8:1. No condemnation in, no fear out, because the engine that drives fear is the belief that a second power can spring from an event and rule you. When that engine is dismantled by non-judgment, guidance becomes startlingly clear. You are no longer reacting to evil, you are receiving instruction. And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it. Isaiah 30:21. Then you find yourself doing the intelligent thing, not the frantic thing, because you are not negotiating with a storm, you are consenting to God. Perfect love casteth out fear, 1 John 4:18. And love here is not sentiment. It is the recognition of one. You will discover that even your voice changes. A tone of warfare yields to a tone of authority without heat. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works, John 14:10. It's not passivity. That is power rightly placed. So come out from among them, out from the nightly tribunals you hold over faces in your memory, out from the public square where headlines are gods, out from the inner rhetoric that says safety depends upon condemning. Step into your own house under grace and take your seat as what you are, not a judge of appearances, but a witness to God. All day long, in the presence of a person, a report, a recollection, practice this. One power. Say quietly within yourself, there is no power in any effect because God is all power. God constitutes my being, their being, this being. I and my Father are one, John 10:30. And because of that oneness, I can bless those who curse without bowing to them, love enemies without inviting harm, answer need without panic. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Luke 6:36. This is really it. Non-judgment is the doorway into grace because it ends the superstition of a second power. Walk through and you will discover that condemnation and fear have no keys to the room you now occupy. You have come out, and under grace you remain. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. There is a different air to breathe once you have come out from among them. Under law, you inhale effects and exhale predictions. You look at the sky and prophesy storms in your soul. Under grace, you breathe, cause, you rest in the omnipresent harmony that is already here, unseen to the sense that judges, but tangible to the consciousness that knows. Take therefore no thought for the morrow. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Matthew 6:34. The Master was not suggesting irresponsibility. He was revealing a different atmosphere of cause. To take thought for tomorrow is to enthrone today's weather as your God. To live under grace is to acknowledge God as cause, and to let forms be what they are, passing clouds with no legislative power. What does this mean in the language of your day? It means you stop drawing lines between a delay and a destiny. You refuse to define the end from the middle. You do not prophesy loss from a delay, sickness from a symptom, failure from a setback. Those are courtroom forecasts. They are the old law speaking. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again. Romans 8:34. Condemnation is the voice of a second power. Christ rising is the announcement of one. When you rest in one, you let unfinished scenes be unfinished without offering them your fear as cement. You say within yourself, quietly, lawfully, God is the only cause. Therefore, the future of this scene is not written by weather, nor by numbers, nor by the rumor of men, but by the presence that is already complete. I am the Lord. I change not. Malachi 3-6. That is cause. Everything else is atmosphere. Hear me. The integrity of your life is not at the mercy of yesterday's letter or this afternoon's symptom. God is the substance of your supply, so the source is intact even when employment changes its clothing. God is the intelligence of your decisions, so the guidance is intact even when data lags behind the hour. God is the life of your body, so the vitality is intact even while tissues rearrange to reveal what has always been true behind them. In Him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17:28. Being does not hang on weather. Weather hangs on being. That is why you can look at a dim bank balance and refuse to author a tragedy. You can notice a twinge and decline to print a timetable to the grave. You can meet a closed door and resist the urge to baptize it final. You are not neglecting wisdom. You are guarding cause. What happens outwardly to a life that stops forecasting from appearances? The mind, no longer conscripted into meteorology, becomes a sanctuary again. You notice guidance you missed when you were measuring clouds. A delay, once interpreted as doom, becomes an interval in which a call arrives, a connection forms, an unseen alignment finishes its work. A symptom, once announced as sentence, becomes an occasion to rest, to listen, to alter a pace that was never yours to keep. Consider the lilies of the field. Shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Matthew 6:28-30. Lilies do not forecast. They consent to what is. Your consent is not passivity. It is allegiance to God as cause and a refusal to enthrone effects. Do not say, I have heard this, and then go right back to reading clouds. The habit of predicting from appearances is old. It is Genesis old. It is the tree old reflex of good and evil, and to unlearn it requires repetition and steady remembrance. Not because truth is difficult, truth is simple. One is simple, but because your tongue and nerves and calendar have been trained by a lifetime at the bar of appearances. So I urge you, as I have urged in every city I have stood in, take this into practice until the groove is cut in your consciousness. Start with the word God. Several times each day, look straight at a picture that invites forecasting and refuse it. Affirm, not to convince God, but to cleanse your own lens. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. God constitutes my being, this being, their being. Then wait not 10 seconds if strain still bites, not 10 minutes if peace has not yet clicked. Wait until assurance rises. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Matthew 6:10. Heaven is cause recognized. Earth is the form it takes as you stop judging. Under grace, you cease writing tomorrow's tragedies from today's clouds and begin living now in the only weather that governs the changeless presence of God. This is really it. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. If you would have this become your climate and not a weather pattern, you must shape your day around it, not as an austerity, not as a penance, but as sanity. Here is the regimen, and if I could write it over your door frames, I would. 3 times a day, at least 3, pause and start with God. Morning, midday, evening, upon waking in the thick of the hours before you surrender the night. In each pause, do not start with your need. Start with God. God is. God is the only presence, the only power, the only law, the only life. There is no power in any effect because God is all power. God constitutes my being, this being, their being. Say it not to inform God, but to cleanse the lens of your own awareness. Then do the one brave thing most neglect. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Wait not dutifully counting seconds, but humbly until assurance dawns. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Psalm 27:14. If strain still bites, you are not done. If fear still narrates, you are not done. Wait until the click, the soft weight of presence settles, and the demand for explanations loosens its hand from your throat. Now, this is not a cloistered program. The day will bring you its small bells, tardy trains, sharp emails, a sudden ache, a bill that looks larger than you wished, news that parades its panic. Use them, not as proofs of evil, but as summons back to grace. When the delay announces, you will miss, and missing is doom. Refuse the first interpretation and silently return. God. When criticism stings and the court in you rises to defend or accuse, close the court. God. When the knee twinges and an old timeline of decline begins to unroll, cut the film. God. Enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father, which is in secret. Matthew 6:6. The closet is not a room. It is the inner refusal to enthrone an effect. Start with God. Deny the second power. Wait in silence till assurance replaces strain. Then, if action is required, you will act without heat, guided not by fear, but by presence. Insist on consistency. Do it when you feel fine, not merely when you are frightened. Anyone can remember God under a siren. The disciple remembers God under a blue sky. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. Luke 16:10. The least, the small delay, the minor slight, the unnoticed ache are your training ground. If you will anchor this practice in the quiet hours, It will hold you in the storm. If you abandon it when all is well, you have begun to worship appearances again, awarding them the right to decide when you pray. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths, Proverbs 3-6. All thy ways includes the ways that seem easy and the ways that seem impossible. Don't think you can turn this on or off like your water tap. Let the 3 pauses be your covenant, and let every irritation ring the bell of your remembrance. Do not measure the practice by fireworks. The promise is not that every cloud parts on your timetable. The promise is that trust becomes natural because you remove the one thing that made it unnatural judgment. You are not manufacturing faith. You are ceasing to feed the belief in a second power. The kingdom of God is within you, Luke 17:21. As you return and return and return, you will find that explanations demand less rent from your mind. The peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Philippians 4-7. Peace that passes understanding does not wait for a reason. It arises when the court is adjourned and one is known. Set the rule plainly. Fix the 3 pauses to real anchors. Upon waking, lay the hand upon the heart and start with God. At midday, set an alarm. If you must, step aside for 2 or 10 minutes until the click comes. At night, before you turn out the light, return everything you have seen to one. Then let the bells of life, irritations, delays, reports be your extra invitations. Some days the 3 will become 7. Some nights the evening pause will extend into a deep silence that renews you beyond sleep. Pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 becomes not a burden but a rhythm, because prayer in this way is not words. It is non-judgment and the steady acknowledgement of God's allness. Do this, and you will not have to chase explanations like a child running after kites. You will find yourself living under grace, where outcomes are no longer your deity and appearances no longer your law. Start with God, deny power to effect, be still until assurance rises. 3 pauses, 1 practice, no explanations required. This is really it. I say this with a great deal of seriousness. Hear it once more, because this is the hinge upon which you pass from law to grace. The very instant you demand an explanation from life, you have consented to judge the appearance, and in that judgment you step back under the law of fear. The urge to explain is the urge to sit on the bench and pronounce a verdict, good or evil, and that verdict resurrects the second power in your own thought. From that moment, the nerves stand trial. The mind wrings its hands. The heart rehearses catastrophes. But when you release judgment, you withdraw the scepter from effects. When you return all power to God, you take your seat in truth. When you enter stillness, assurance rises. And when assurance rises, grace that was already present becomes visible. That is the sequence. Explain, judge, fear, or renounce. Know, wait, assurance, grace. Therefore, the charge is plain, and I will put it in a form you cannot mistake. Do not condemn. Do not judge. Do not grant reality or authority to any effect. There is no power in any effect, because God is all power. Start with the word God. God is. God is the only presence, the only power, the only law, the only life. God constitutes your being. God constitutes their being. God constitutes this very moment. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. Righteous judgment is the end of condemnation and the confession of one. Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. Mark 10:18. One good, one power, one presence. Under that one, you are freed from the tyranny of outcomes and the superstition of appearances. And then Obey the method that has been placed in your hands, because it is the way through. Know the truth of God's allness and the nature of error, namely, that what parades as evil lives on your consent to duality, and then wait. Be still, not with clock watching, but with holy refusal to rise until assurance comes. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. When assurance dawns, you will recognize it. The demand for reasons loosens, the court adjourns, a quiet authority takes the chair within. That is prayer fulfilled. That is healing begun. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. John 14:27. Do not imagine you can visit this and go on your way. I urge you, revisit these truths until they are your weather. As soon as you can hear them again, hear them again. Read them, ponder them, speak them softly to your own soul. Take every opportunity to let them train your tongue not to judge, your eyes not to enthrone effects, your thought life not to bow to headlines. Faith cometh by hearing, Romans 10:17. And here the hearing is not bare sound. It is the repeated recognition that God alone is cause. If you will do this quietly, faithfully, you will discover that trust becomes natural, not because you have reasons, but because you have renounced the need for them. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Psalm 23:1-4. With me now. So let it be said in you now, without reservation, I will not name evil, I will not enthrone effects. I will start with God, return to God, wait for God, until God's assurance replaces fear as the climate of my being. You are not asked to understand everything. You are asked to stop judging and let God be God in you. And in that letting, explanation retires and presence governs. I and my Father are one, John 10:30. One is enough. This is really it. Thank you.